Do you have a kid who can debate like a tiny lawyer and explain black holes, yet reading feels like decoding ancient hieroglyphics? Are you up at night trying to figure out how to open the world of reading for your gifted child because you worry about their future? Well, if this sounds like your household, pull up a chair, pour yourself a glass, and let's explore Twice Exceptional Kids. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Tracy Young, OG tutor extraordinaire, founder of theliteracykeys.com, and most importantly, mom of a dyslexic daughter. Welcome to my podcast, where you'll discover ways to unlock your child's reading potential. I'll share tips, strategies, and war stories that have happened along the way, because everyone deserves to be able to read. So let's get started. Hello, I'm Tracy Young, your host of The Literacy Keys, the podcast for parents who are trying to help a struggling reader without losing your mind. I know, because I've been there. I'm mom to an amazing dyslexic daughter. We've had our ups and downs, if I'm going to be honest, and along the way, I became a certified Orton Gillingham tutor and love working with students who have been underestimated for way too long. Now, today's episode is about twice exceptional kids. You'll learn what the term means, why these kids can fly under the radar, and some things you can do this week to help them. Let's start with the definition, because that's always a good place to start. What does twice exceptional mean? And what does it mean for parenting? So let's start with parenting twice exceptional kids can mean that you get a lot of comments from others like, well, she's so bright, she'll be fine. Oh, you're too demanding. Just relax, it'll all work out. You watch your kid work twice as hard for half the output, and you're wondering why you're the only one seeing it. It's not a matter of relaxing. What is this twice exceptional thing all about? The term, sometimes written as the number 2 followed by the letter E, 2E, refers to a child who is exceptional in 2 different areas. So, for example, they have a high ability in reasoning, problem solving, maybe their advanced vocabulary, or intense curiosity and amazing visual spatial skills. But at the same time, they also have a disability or learning difference that significantly impacts performance in school. In other words, a twice exceptional child might be intellectually gifted, at least according to IQ, and also have dyslexia or even dyscalculia. Remember, that's the math dyslexia? They can be gifted and have ADHD. There are so many permutations under the term twice exceptional. Now, here is part of what not everyone understands and why I thought it was important to have an episode about this. Because being gifted does not cancel out and negate a learning difference, right? The two coexist. And in fact, sometimes they collide. Let's face it, 2E kids often don't look like the typical struggling learner. They're often missed. And let's talk about why they fly under the radar. First of all, they compensate, and they compensate really well. A bright kid can use context to figure out the words. They can memorize text, cite words, anything that was read aloud to them. Best of all, they use charm, humor, and social intelligence in order to dodge. So in the younger grades, this strategy works exceptionally well. Basically, no one notices. But as they get older, the demands increase at school. There's more reading, there's more writing, the textbooks become thicker, The projects are longer and multi-step, and suddenly compensation doesn't work anymore. They hit that brick wall that I've mentioned in other episodes. Now, I worked with a fourth grade student who was extremely articulate, inquisitive, and could discuss so many topics well beyond the average child of her age. She came to me because her reading was slow and laborious. When we actually assessed her skills, she indeed had gaps in decoding and spelling patterns that were never fully taught. She had been compensating with context and memory and doing an amazing job such that no one discovered it. But once we began structured, explicit instruction, what was nice to see was that her stress levels dropped and her confidence came back. Another thing is that their strengths mask their challenges. So they might read well enough, but many don't realize how much effort is required because twice exceptional kids might write well enough, but only if you sit next to them for 2 hours in order to get the work done. 2E kids might score average on tests, which sounds great until you understand where they could be performing. In fact, average for a gifted child can actually be a red flag. So, following along this line of reasoning, a child who is constantly overwhelmed can look disengaged, defiant, or maybe even not that bright, when in fact, they're extremely intelligent, but they're stuck. And this kind of brings us to the third point. They will often internalize their struggles. And this is something that happens especially as they get older. Instead of acting out, some twice exceptional kids become perfectionists. They avoid and will stop taking risks because they don't want to feel dumb. I had one student several years ago. Her IQ was absolutely off the charts, but I could not get her to read anything out loud. That's because she knew what it was supposed to sound like, and she absolutely refused to allow anyone to hear her read out loud because it wouldn't be as good as what she thought it should be. My advice is always pick your battles. And that became my motto with this student, at least initially. And we did a lot of choral reading. That was the approach that she could say it at the same time I was saying it, right? A little bit lower so that I couldn't necessarily hear it, but yet we were able to get the practice in. Now, let's take and try to make this a little more concrete, right? And some of the things that I see according to the different ages and grades in upper elementary, so you're looking at grades 3 through 5, you're going to see incredibly strong oral reading vocabulary, but weak reading fluency. What happens when they read out loud? It's kind of stilted, is a really good way to describe it. Their spelling is absolutely surprising. It could be messy, or it could be kind of indecipherable for such a smart kid. Overall, homework takes forever or a lot longer than it should, even though your child can explain the concept quickly out loud at a level several grades above where they're currently at. And along those lines, big emotions over reading anything out loud or over timed work or writing assignments. All right, so that's at the elementary grades. In middle school, you might start to see that the grades of twice exceptional kids start to slip because the volume of work increases. Reading becomes slower, the stamina drops, and the comprehension can get shaky because the text becomes much denser. Writing is still a battleground, whether it's organization, grammar, spelling, procrastination, one of my favorites, could even be missing assignments. You might start to see anxiety and confidence drop. And this is also when sarcasm arrives. A lot of times it's used to mask their real feelings. All right, so if you can get through those grades by the time they get to high school and are still flying under the radar, what you might see is the cracks definitely widen quickly because the expectations are high and time becomes even more limited. Kids might look lazy, but in fact, they're often exhausted. A lot of times they can be relying on Spark Notes, audiobooks, friends' notes, or just sheer brute force, hours upon hours of homework. They may refuse support primarily because they don't want to look different. They don't want to stand out. And please don't underestimate this because it can be a major battleground. Some students become so perfectionistic that they can't start anything unless it's guaranteed to be excellent. And that doesn't always happen. So, if any of these broad generalizations make you kind of sit back and say, that's my kid, take a deep breath. All right. Let's talk about what tends to trip up twice exceptional kids. I promise to talk about what you can do, but first let's spend a few minutes getting into more details about the challenges. So, one of the challenges is hidden decoding and fluency gaps. A bright student can often get the gist without reading accurately, but as the text gets harder, simple guessing falls apart. And that's why comprehension drops, right? All their brain power is being used just to lift the words off of the page. And anything more than 2% of the words that are unfamiliar, and it begins to negatively impact comprehension. Let's talk about another challenge. Twice exceptional kids might have brilliant ideas and yet produce writing that looks incomplete. The writing is harder than it looks because it's not one skill. In fact, writing is a series of skills. And I just had an episode on what you can do to improve writing for your child. So you might want to check it out. But what happens is that as a parent, you see this mismatch. Your child can talk like an adult, but writes like a much younger student because writing involves organizing ideas, holding them in working memory, building the sentences, using the punctuation, grammar, thinking about spelling, editing, etc., etc., etc. All right. This kind of flows into another area, executive functioning, which is basically a fancy term for organizational and critical thinking, right? All that stuff that happens in the frontal lobe, the frontal cortex. So many 2E kids know what to do. They just can't get started. My daughter Alex talks about staring at a computer screen with a title when she had to write an essay and being unable to get started. Twice exceptional kids may struggle with planning, breaking down tasks, estimating time, remembering the different steps, and staying with something that feels hard. Now, this last point is really important. I am not saying that all twice exceptional kids are going to experience it, but in my experience, this is a pattern that I see over and over again. Perseverance is necessary, and some children do not know what to do when the task becomes difficult. They may give up too quickly Because twice exceptional kids are smart, adults often assume that they're choosing not to do it. And this usually is the farthest thing from the truth. In fact, what's usually happening is that they're overwhelmed, but don't know how to handle that overwhelm, which kind of leads us to the next thing that you might see, an emotional fallout. So, when school is consistently harder than it should be, twice exceptional kids protect themselves. They avoid, they joke, they may argue or even refuse. They collapse at home when it's safe, right? Many twice exceptional kids, they're able to hold it all together at school, but then they burst, kind of like a bubble, pop the second they walk in the door. Lucky you. All right, so we have a better understanding of twice exceptional kids. We can understand some of the elements that are driving the behaviors that you may be seeing at home, but it's important, and that's what this podcast is about. We need to move from insight into action. It really is about empowering parents, you. And that knowledge and understanding are needed, but it's only part of the equation. So let's move to 3 things that you can do to help your twice exceptional kids, right? Maybe you even have more than one. I'm going to give you 3 things that you can do this week. No, they're not perfect steps. They are not change your entire life steps. They're real steps. They're things that you can do now. So, the first thing, if you do not have an evaluation, you need to ask for the right evaluation. And here's where I will be perfectly honest. If the school pushes back and says, oh, they're smart, they'll be fine, that is not an exception. That is not an acceptable answer. If you suspect dyslexia or any other type of learning difference, what you want to ask for is a comprehensive evaluation that looks at more than one variable, right? And this is key because a lot of times schools will do a much narrower evaluation. They don't do a comprehensive evaluation. But if it looks good, you're trusting them to go through and give you the evaluation and to tell you what's wrong. You want to ask and see if the comprehensive evaluation includes the following: a cognitive test. And I'm going to throw out some terms, right? The WISC or the WPPSI. You also want to see if it has academic achievement tests. Your Woodcock-Johnson, your Wyatt, W-I-A-T. These are your IQ ones. You want to make sure that it includes phonological processing, your CTOP, C-T-O-P-P. It also should include Gray oral reading, G-O-R-T. Ask about the test of a word reading efficiency, TOWER, T-O-W-R-E. Don't you love all these acronyms? I'll list it in the show notes. Another test that should be included in a comprehensive evaluation is a test of written language, the TOWL, T-O-W-L. The test of auditory processing, TAPS, T-A-P-S. The Nelson-Denning reading test, N-D-R-T. And you can ask about OT and PT assessments, as well as behavioral and emotional assessments. So you can see why most schools do not do a comprehensive evaluation. I just rattled off 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 different assessments. And if a school does 10 assessments for every single child, well, you can start adding up the dollar signs and figure out how long it would take to evaluate a child. Mhm. Schools are practical. Many of them are doing the best they can. So if you ask a question and these are not included, put it in writing that these are the evaluations that should be included, right? Because if they disagree, you're going to ask for a prior written notice, and then that's going to allow you to take and get an IEE, which is an independent educational evaluation, in which all of these tests are included. All right. So while they're getting evaluated, or maybe your child has been evaluated and they are twice exceptional, they're one of the twice exceptional kids, right? Then what do? Well, you want to get structured literacy support for the skills gap, right? Intervention matters. And you need instruction that's explicit, structured, and systematic, right? You want your child taught how the English language works. What are the sounds, the spelling patterns, morphology, how everything can be applied to reading and writing. And if I can toot my own horn, this is where Orton Gillingham-based instruction is often a great fit because it is direct and diagnostic, right? We teach, we practice, we adjust. I find that TUI kids love to know the why behind everything. So the more information about the why that you provide, the faster they absorb it. It makes sense. It's not simply a rule that they have to memorize. There's logic behind it. So I will admit that this can make for some challenging sessions, but even tutors need to be pushed. Why? Well, I'm not quite sure, but I am going to find out for next session. I have said those words many a time. Right? And the third step that I think it is really, really important that every parent can do is you can acknowledge how hard it can be. Now, it's true that a twice exceptional child can turn homework into a daily battleground. They may shut down when things become difficult. But if you acknowledge how hard it is, it usually shifts everything. I had an incredibly gifted student who hit a plateau in her reading. She was struggling with the vowel consonant E pattern, so I knew that she needed more practice on this pattern. So it was in a session, and she was just about to melt down. I could see it in her face and her body language, the arms crossed, looking down, not happy. I stopped the lesson. What I did at that moment was simply acknowledge how difficult this was for her. Just validating that she was struggling made all the difference. Granted, I also said that we were going to continue working on the pattern in our next session until she mastered it, which probably was not going to be fun, but I would make sure that she could do it. That was my promise to her. And that's a promise that you as a parent can make. It's going to be hard, but they will get through it. So let me end with this. Twice exceptional kids, they are complex. They have real strengths and real obstacles. And it's when we support both their strengths and acknowledge their obstacles that they thrive. So if you suspect you have a twice exceptional child, I want you to walk away with these two things. Number one, you are not alone. And number two, there are steps that you can take to get your child the right support. If this episode helped you, I'm going to ask a favor. Please share it with another parent and leave a quick review. It really helps other parents find this show because it tells the podcast algorithm, more of this, please. I'm Tracy Young, and you're listening to the Literacy Keys. Remember, you've got this, one step at a time. I will see you next week. Thank you. Well, that's a wrap. Thank you for listening to the Literacy Keys podcast. Follow us on social media, and most importantly, tell a friend. See you next week.